Hi, I'm Dr. Ashley Fuller.
And I'm Dr. Meredith McClure.
And this is Labiologic,
the podcast that's all vulva, no filter.
We're here to talk about all the stuff your doctor rushed through, the questions you've been too embarrassed to ask, and the sex ed that barely mentioned the vulva.
Because too many people are suffering in silence with painful sex, menopause misery, and vulvar issues no one talks about.
No shame, no stigma, just real talk, real answers, and the education you should have gotten in the first place.
Hello, and welcome back to Labiologic. I'm Dr. Meredith McClure, and with me today is, as usual, Dr. Ashley Fuller, and we have a very special guest, and it is Trista Jones, sex therapist. Welcome, Trista.
Yay, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on this episode of our month of 50 Shades of Nay, where we're talking about libido, mostly lack of libido or sex drive, and a little bit about Trista. She is the owner of SHE, which stands for Sexual Health Experts here in Dallas, Fort Worth. And among her many credentials, she's a licensed professional counselor and a certified sex therapist. She specializes in sexual health and wellness. She's also a trauma specialist who helps her clients identify and address underlying issues that can inhibit fulfillment and satisfaction. She's passionate in working with women who are looking to claim, reclaim, and or enhance their sexual health. And I'm lucky enough to know Trista and get to work with her and share many patients with her. So I'm happy to introduce you to the Labiologic universe.
Honored to be here. It's incredible to be amongst others that are touching lives in really big ways. So thanks for having me.
You're the best. So, so I think kind of starting off, because I think a lot of people, actually, I think you probably feel the same way when we say, maybe you might want to think about sex therapy. They get a little nervous.
Yes. They're like, what am I going to do there? What happens there?
So, are they going to be watching me?
Yeah. Yes.
Looking at me? Seeing pictures of me? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Trista, how did you get into sex therapy?
I actually built on kind of the sexual trauma side of things and really seeing the injuries and the distress of sexual trauma in general and the impact it had on sexual health. That's really what drew me into sex therapy. And then I saw this gap surrounding how to reclaim it, how to really transform that energy in a constructive way to be able to feel good about your sexuality, about your body, about your overall sexual health. And then I really saw a need for transforming this in a constructive and healthy way. So it's just been a passion of mine and truly just an illuminated path, I would say, for me to travel down. It just kind of all fell into place and feels really right.
And you've got some certifications under your belt that are really impressive and actually hard to get. So
it takes time to really understand, because starting with the sexual trauma aspect of things and the compulsive sexual behaviors that can come as a result of that, and the abstinence of sexual health and awareness that can come of that. There's just a lot of different portals that you can access and really get into once you really start to understand it. So that's where I kind of developed the ongoing training and understanding of what could benefit my patients that I see.
Yeah. And this is a vulva podcast, which of course, we segue into libido from vulvas because people who have problems with their vulvas can have low desire to have sex. And so you are an integral part of the team sport that is taking care of vulvas. We work together on other things, including we've worked with persistent genital arousal and orgasm trouble. So there's a lot of things that I think people don't realize sex therapists can help with.
And really how it's all interconnected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every day we say it. It's all connected.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes. And I always think too, because we're a vulva podcast and vulva specialists, and we see a lot of vulvar pain coming from the trauma perspective. I think it's so important, obviously, for people who've had sexual trauma, like non-consensual sexual traumas, things like that. But also, for a lot of my young patients, or all my aged patients that have pain when they go to have sex and it hurts, it's traumatic. And I always tell them, even though this is not a non-consensual trauma, it is traumatic every time you do it, and your brain feels that trauma.
Yeah, and really recreating a whole new narrative as a result of going through that distress, and bringing that in to really heal and claim your sexual health.
Yeah. And even some of our patients have some of these vulvar conditions that go years without a diagnosis, and they see so many people and practitioners and they don't get answers, and giving up that hope, and they have might have pain and problems, and where you're so helpful, and even with just medical trauma.
Hmm. And you make a really good point when you even say, they've gone through a lot of doctors. They've been trying to figure out what's going on with their body. And then they've been told that there's nothing wrong when they're seeking the wrong help, right? And so then just kind of what happens internally, what happens to your intuition, what happens to these experiences in this life that continues to move on as you're dealing with kind of these ghost symptoms that are really something much bigger.
Hmm.
So claiming that trust again within yourself and knowing your body.
What would you say sex therapy looks like? Because you see individuals, you see couples. Like, what's it going to look like if somebody reaches out to you to look for help?
It's a vague question, but I kind of like to break it down and simplify it to some degree to know what to expect because you're talking about something that's really delicate. It can be uncomfortable for most and uneasy. And so the idea you're contacting a sex therapist or you're walking into an office just to kind of get a general idea of kind of what to expect, I think would benefit a lot of people. And how I categorize it is really in two different camps. Brief sex therapy. Initially, when you come in, obviously, we're trying to create a space for permission to be open and talking about sex and talking about things that maybe you're sharing for the first time or you're even verbalizing or connecting to for the first time. So, really creating a space where that permission to talk about sex is appropriate and okay. And even though I'm comfortable in talking about it, it doesn't necessarily mean the client or the patient coming in is. And so it's really important that I'm bringing in that dialogue and that conversation to gain a comfortability in talking about these things that can be really sensitive. And so initially, it's just creating that safe, comfortable space. For therapists, we find what's most effective for ideal outcomes in therapy is rapport, trusting me, knowing that you can open up to me and we can really talk about anything and explore and expand and stretch it and grow it to some degree. And so I spend time in that space initially, as long as it takes until there's that space of comfortability. And then we start to get into whether it's mapping our vulva or just information, psychoeducation aspect of that brief therapy piece. And then we move into modalities and strategies that you use outside of my office, despite what media may say, right? I'm not watching these sexual positions or looking at these things in my office. These are tools and strategies for you to utilize outside of my space. And
Amazing.
then we come in and we unpack it and we explore it a little bit more and get into it and understand it. It's more self discovery and it's gaining more confidence and comfortability in just your own sexual values, your own sexual health, your own sexuality. And so that's ideal, right? Ideally, I'd love to come in and beautiful, we're just going to target this. I'm having issues with orgasm. I want to increase my libido. And it sounds ideal, but oftentimes this is that second camp I was talking about. Oftentimes we can have more of those psychosocial issues that can block or inhibit, get in our way of being able to really utilize those strategies and tools effectively and have an ideal outcome. And so those psychosocial issues can be anything like I talked about, trauma, medical trauma, emotional distress, stress in general is a major libido killer. A lot of times people come into my space and, okay, fix me. And as we get into a conversation, I start to realize there's relational issues that definitely get in the way of having a safe space to explore our sexuality. And so we look at those relationship issues. And the second most common thing that I see is body image issues.
Hmm.
When I look at myself in the mirror, who do I see looking at me? And how do I feel about my body throughout this aging process?
For
And
sure.
and we know some women going through menopause, I'm woman, hear me roar. And others going through menopause, gosh, they lose a big part of themselves, many pieces of themselves. So there's a lot of grief there.
Yeah. And we have, patients with lichen sclerosis and lichen planus where these skin disorders will impact their anatomy and their labia can resorb and the clitoris can not be visible. And that can be really traumatic for people.
And really meeting yourself where you're at and growing that self acceptance to be able to work within the parameters that it is that we have. And that's kind of where mindfulness practice comes into such play in this. Like I've had patients with dyspareunia, and obviously they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy. However, I've also heard the other side of that of God, I wish I would have known some of these things. I'm having the best sex that I've ever had
Yeah.
just by growing that awareness and that self focus of self and claiming within limitations.
When she says dyspareunia, she means pain with sex. Just,
Yes, sorry.
it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
Tell me about the difference between seeing a patient by themselves and seeing them as a couple. Like I had a patient the other day who came in to talk to me about libido, and she said, honestly, like my libido's been kind of low my whole life. Like it's low in my relationship right now, and it's causing some distress to me. But like honestly, like I've never been super into it. And I was recommending like, that might be something. It might be time to explore your sexuality a little more, like just like what sex means to you, what turns you on, what these things. And like I was thinking a sex therapist would be a good person to do that with. And she's like, well, don't you have to go with your partner? And I said, no, you definitely can go by yourself. But I just wondered what you think about like when it's better to have the couple and when it's better to have the patient by themselves.
that's a really good question. It's hard to really put your finger on what is it? Like, is this my issue? Is this a we issue? Kind of what's going on here? And I think either way, that's where I'm really fluid in just creating this space, because what may seem like a me issue really turns into a we issue. We're coming in together as a couple and then really being able to sift through those pieces to recognize, okay, I got some of my own blocks and barriers here. And then we get to talk about, all right, let's go unpack those blocks and barriers. And then we're going to come back and see how things move. Or we're coming in as an individual. And then we're kind of exploring what's going on in the relationship. What happens when you say, you know, I get it, sex is consensual, but what happens when you say, you know what, honey, I'm not in the mood? Things get a little tense. They get uncomfortable. He's usually in a crabby mood for a while. And then becomes kind of these implicit consequences where I should be having sex. I feel bad that I haven't had sex. I'm not meeting his needs. And so then there's that underlying pressure where all we need to do is kind of bring that relationship in to build these communication skills surrounding a delicate topic. If you think about it, oftentimes we're only talking about sex when it's an issue and a problem. And not only, but usually more often than not. Think about the framework of that. It alludes to it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be awkward. It's going to create conflict and tension. And so we will also want to create a space where it's just easy to unpack and talk and expand and just let it be, not solve it, but just hold space with it.
I always think that's one of the things that you guys are so great at when patients are like, it's hard to talk about these things with their partner. Like, like the communication piece, because sex is hard to talk about and it's so vulnerable and it's so intimate. Like you said, creating that space, and especially for a couple to be able to talk honestly about what's going on for them in the realm of their sex lives. And so I think that that's one of the big things I recommend sex therapists for.
You're developing that comfortability and that confidence to be able to talk about a sensitive subject that can create a lot of distress within relationships. And so finding an ease in that.
But the individual aspect, that can be the individual coming in at you right in that moment, but there can be so much in the background and that people might not even realize, because we're so good at storing things in places in our brains that we just forget about it. And it's a gamut of things and experiences to religion, to your upbringing. And that's where you're so helpful in kind of unpacking a lot of this.
We talk about it like you're coming in with a presenting issue, and you make such a valid point, really recognizing kind of what ties into that, what it's linked to, what its origin is, and really peeling back those layers to get a deeper insight and understanding of, okay, now I know, now I have a better understanding. Now I can transform it in a different way that's healthy for me.
I feel it's really hard as a physician to get to that root. And like, we don't have the time for one, because if you do unpack something, then you're like, we got it. There's next something I got to go do. Another patient waiting. And what do we do with it? We're not trained in this. And I think so many people just get asked like just a point blank question. Do you have a history of trauma? And like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I think people, when they have problems with sex, practitioners think it's automatically trauma, but it isn't always. It is for sure sometimes. But how do you approach that?
That right there just indicates that there's a problem, right? I'm very solution focused and just really organically allowing that to come into play as to, tell me about yourself. I want to know about your life. I want to know what's going on. How were you raised? What was it like to go through your first menstrual cycle? Understanding all of these things that build up into sexual health, right?
It's not just a one question, one answer.
Yeah, not necessarily directing it towards there has to be something wrong, but more so opening it up of tell me more about yourself. Like, I want to know your history, because we can too project that that was traumatic when in fact maybe they're not in a space of readiness or don't even declare it as traumatic, right? Or as distressing. And so really tailoring that to the individual.
Yeah. And then what they carry from their past and their present into their relationships.
Absolutely.
And you're so good at talking to them about that and talking to their partners. And that's when the partner therapy comes into play for sure.
And oftentimes, if an individual comes into, I think that relational piece is so important. More often than not, I do welcome it in. Not always am I taken up on those welcoming it in, but I find it most effective when we can create kind of that sexual language within the coupleship to expand on outside of therapy, to just have those tools, both of them, all of them.
My perimenopausal or early menopause patients that are like, I love my husband, but I could never have sex again and not care. Like, I do it, it's fine, but I literally don't care about it. And if I never had sex again, I'd be fine. So what is your approach when we send those patients to you? I mean, we try to take a big step back, and we did a previous podcast about the biopsychosocial model, all the things. But tell me about what it feels like when those patients come to see you.
Right. And the less that we're having sex, we as women, the less we're wanting sex. And oftentimes the first question I ask is, tell me about the sex you're having. Do you like it? What do you like about it? Because we're not going to want sex if we're not liking the sex we're having. And sex is such a broad term, right? Sex doesn't have to equate to intercourse. Sex can be a heavy makeout session. It can be petting. It can be just arousing where it doesn't even get to the point of climax. So really breaking it down and understanding, what is sex? What do you like about being touched? And kind of breathing life into that aspect of it too. And it's amazing just formulating the conversations about it where, holy smokes, I haven't even thought about that. And kind
Yeah.
of where it brings me, where I may go home feeling a little bit differently today than I had historically. And so that's what I love about just gaining dialogue about sex, pleasure receptors, arousal, is you're thinking about it. And guess what our biggest sex organ is? It's our brain. And so when we're thinking about it and we're talking about it, it's a little more available. It's a little more accessible. It's right there on the shelf. And so just being able to engage in dialogue about it can create a chance for different things to happen.
I love that. It kind of turns things on in the brain that probably were turned off.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
always say, we know that stress and fatigue are two of the biggest libido killers, right? And so many of us middle-aged women have a lot of stress and fatigue. And so, how do we manage that differently? I tell patients it's so easy to just push this to the back burner. Like, we're in survival mode, we're getting everything done. It just gets pushed further and further back. And then we have less sex, then we think about sex less because we're not even having sex. And just it tumbles downhill to this, yeah, I could never have it again because I don't ever think about it because I'm doing all these other things in life. So like trying to pull that back of like, okay, maybe if I could even just start talking about it again. Like you even said, like one session, just thinking about sex, talking about it, it reminds your brain like, oh, wait, I do like this. I just have shut that part off for a while.
Yeah, I haven't tapped into her in a while.
Yeah. I've been ignoring her.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, people come to us, like, so they come to Ashley and me first because it's got to be my hormones, right? It's going to be my hormones, and libido is so much more than that. It's a facet, and for some people that can help, but there's so much more we need to ask. And this is us working the biological component of libido is, like you said, is the sex you're having worth having? Is it pleasurable? Does it hurt? Like send us down roads, where we can, oh God, I probably need to look at your vulva. Maybe you have lichen sclerosis and it's ripping every time you have sex. Well, nobody wants to do that. So let's look at those things. Sure, like hormones and perimenopause and menopause can be a factor. Medicines you take, antidepressants, things like that. That's where we come in. But it's so much more than a lab draw. That's the easy way to try to fix it. And it's not unlocking the really root. And like you told me, like, Meredith, sex in your 20s looks a lot different than sex in your 40s and your 50s. And this is that psychosocial component because there's so many other things with stress in the family. Your children are older and they're in the house and they know you're going to have, they know if you're having sex sometimes. Like, nobody wants to do that. Or my mother-in-law lives with me now. And this is this psychosocial stuff that you really have the time and obviously the expertise in helping people to kind of understand that.
And to navigate ways with it, right? Like recognizing our limitations and how do we work within our limits. And so it's fulfilling and it's satisfying for us, for our relationship, and for our overall health, right?
Because we're busy women, we want it to be one thing. Like we come in and patients want it just to be their testosterone and get a prescription for testosterone and fix this problem. Check that box. I mean, I love checking boxes, but like, this is not one of those things you can just check a box. And so when I see patients and I say, oh yeah, we can look at your testosterone. It is one component of a large amount of things that are affecting your sex life and your desire to have sex. So if we just did the testosterone and didn't talk about all these other things, you may get some benefit, but it's going to be fairly limited. We have to really look at all the aspects of what's affecting your sex drive, like body image, like you mentioned, your hormones, your relationship, your stress and fatigue. I mean, there's just so many, what medications you're on, there's so many factors that it's never one answer. I even tell patients, like, there's a lot of resources out there that patients can get, like a lot of great books, like Come As You Are, some of these books. But also that feels like a project, like to come home and read this, like it's homework, like my to-do list is so long, their to-do list is so long. So like kind of trying to frame, like, how do we make time for this thing that we don't really even want to be doing, but we know is important? And how do we make time to work on it? Like that's, I think, also the complicated part of this.
It is. And that's where I think interweaving into things where it's enjoyable, making it fun, making it something I look forward to. Scheduling it where just like we make reservations at a fancy restaurant, we don't just show up at prime time and hope to get a seat. Like really making time for these more intimate experiences that are actually pleasant when we walk out of that. Boy, that meal was really good. Just feeling that felt really good.
Yeah.
No.
And so finding ways that we enjoy it, that we like it.
We know like the Preside study, which is, they looked at desire in women and they kind of found that a lot of women will report low desire, but really the distressing desire or lack of desire is really in like the 40s and the 50s in this perimenopause and menopause time. Like, why do you think that peaks right at this time?
I mean, think about what's going on in our lives, right? It's about everybody else. It is nonstop. When Ashley just talked about the to-do list and sex going to the bottom of it, I mean, it is nonstop, whether your career's at an all-time high and requires that much tedious attention. The kids are older, which requires even more in different work to capacity. And then there's kind of this growing awareness of self in the midst of all of that too. Our body's going through so many changes. Hormonally, things are changing. I think there's a lot of contributing factors to why it peaks in that space. However, that's where I also see it's not all doom and gloom. because what I really enjoy, because if you think about it, how I describe kind of just integrating our sexual health and growing that is really, as adults, that's really the only time we get to play. And so finding things on our playground that are really enjoyable, that are really enticing, that are fun, that I look forward to. And so not just sex, but intimacy in general. It's so much bigger than sex, right? I think that has, again, transforming it in a way where, yeah, there's that to-do list and that's going to be there and we're probably never going to conquer it. And how do we also carve out these moments of where I really like that I did that. I enjoyed it. That felt good.
I think it's kind of important to say, like, when we're doing this, because we talk about spontaneous desire and this, like, I'm going to run home and have sex. Like, most people will lose that after a couple of years at the most in a partnered relationship. But like the responsiveness, like you talk about, like, I'm glad I did that. There's people that still have responsiveness to sexual cues and can still be satisfied. But then there's people who don't have responsiveness. And when we get to these people where they're not holding hands, they're not going to kiss their partner because they don't want that to turn into sex. I mean, these are two different paths that you have to address, because when we get the non-responders, those are definitely more challenging, I would say. But how do you kind of negotiate the responsiveness with either responders, not responders?
That's kind of where we start to build on a foundation of what are we comfortable with. This is kind of when we begin our sensual play and connection of what it is that, and this is non-genital, non-arousing, where we're just engaging and gaining pleasantries and those positive responses to being touched and to touching, and growing our somatic awareness, which is kind of those physical sensations on the inside, where again, it was enjoyable. This is where Betty Dotson, she has a 3-minute game that I always utilize typically with coupleships, just in general, because it's a good way to expand and grow intimacy. And basically, how it boils down is to be able to experience what it's like to be touched in a space that is positive, pleasurable, enjoyable, and you can only give minimal direction. So it's either faster, slower, or firmer or softer. And this is non-arousing, and it's for 3 minutes. No talk, no conversation, but to just receive touch in a space of your body where that's the only directives you're giving. And then after doing so, we reciprocate. You can touch your partner's body on a place where they're comfortable with to just receive. And all we're doing here is we're building that positive responsiveness to grow and expand and bridge that gap where maybe it can evolve into more. Perhaps we can explore a little bit further.
This is kind of what Sensate Focus is. Tell us what that is and if this is kind of a part of that.
This is Sensate Focus, exactly. The purpose of that is the art of giving and receiving touch in a way where there's no expectations. It's just going to be that growing awareness of, what do I notice in my body? How do I feel about it? What's it like? How would I describe it? Give it a color, give it a shape, give it a size. And just let that be and notice what it's like.
Yeah.
Because that gives us, I mean, we're building trust there. We're building comfortability there. We're building confidence there. You think about it, we're encompassing a lot in just a very neutral, what could be a neutral touch. But it's a building block to creating intimacy within the dynamic.
And it's a nice way, because, like, I tell patients, it's a way that we're taking genital touch off the table, breaking it down to build it back up. But yet you have like an intermediary expert in you to really help them to navigate that process.
And that's like the takeaway to that is slowing it down enough to gain your own awareness surrounding what's coming up for me. And that's where we get into kind of that individual sex therapy. You know, that was really uncomfortable. That was awkward. That took me back to the space the first time I remember being touched. And so all of these things can come up when we slow that process down and gain our awareness of really what's going on with me. Maybe it isn't that I'm not attracted to my husband anymore because we've been married for 15 years, but maybe there's some blocks going on internally.
I loved what you said about how, like, how is the sex you're having? Is it good? If it's not pleasurable, I always say, if it's painful, you're not going to want to do it. We have to address the pain first, since we do a lot of pain. But then if it's not pleasurable, you're also not going to want to do it. Like, why would you want to go do something that's boring or it's the same every time? I think that we get into this rut in our relationships where you kind of do the thing, that works, and you kind of do it and you're done. And you're like, okay, well, I know how this is going to go. And it's just not, there's not this like mysticism. There's not this excitement.
Same old, same old.
Mm-hmm. Done there, done that.
Try to get aroused, have penetration, be done. And I think like earlier relationships, there's like more touching and all these things. And so how do you help patients get out of their rut that like try to like add some spiciness or something new to help create it be more pleasurable?
First, understanding it, right? What's our relational sexual script? Because is it that mundane? Is it what's worked for the last 10 years? And that's just what we're going to, and where we have kind of those flickers instead of the fireworks anymore. And how do we incorporate more of that? How do we build that where it is a different and exciting and enticing experience for us? So really just understanding what it is, putting a name to it, identifying it, and dreaming. Like, this is where I love fantasy. I love erotic imagination, allowing yourself to go there, to expand it, to build it. And which is really vulnerable for a lot of individuals, because, oh my gosh, what are you going to think if I say about that? And it's one thing to be in my head, and it's another thing to be verbally expressed. And so really gaining, again, going back to that initial groundwork of rapport, safety, security, the safe space of knowing that it's okay to just be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we get to create something a little bit new, and that may spice things up a bit in the bedroom.
And we've even worked together, the primarily talking about libido or desire, but the other aspects of sex, is arousal and orgasm. And I've even had people where they have orgasmic trouble, but there's mental blocks. It's not a biological reason. There's something holding them back to get to that climax. And you actually really help with that. Because a lot of people wouldn't think that's something to be utilized in those scenarios.
I just more recently had a patient in this that recognizing just how much our emotional well-being ties into letting go and transcending us to that place of orgasm, because it requires you to release and let go. And if I'm containing these emotions over here because it's just too heavy, it's just too much, I got to put a lid on it, life goes on, I just got to keep moving. Recognizing just the release valve that happens and just emotionally letting go, and how that too can tie into us reaching the point of climax. Again, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, really how it all ties in together, right?
Yeah. You have to be present, not thinking about the to-do list. And then you have to be able to let go of all of it to release like the pleasure. And if you are not there mentally, it's not going to feel pleasurable to you. It's going to be harder to achieve orgasm. And then also, I'm sure you tell patients this too, once you're worried about why you can't achieve orgasm, you're focused on what's wrong with you, then it's harder to achieve orgasm because you're not focusing on the pleasure or the touch that you're receiving. And that makes it harder too.
Exactly. And that's reducing those anxiety symptoms that come into play that affect sexual performance. And you make such a good point. If I'm focused on what will be or what was, I lose sight of what is. And if I'm not here, if I'm not present, it requires me to be fully present in that to be able to have a satisfying and fulfilling experience.
So we talked about like the sensate focus, which is the bringing touch back in a kind of way to progress to genital touching, and then mindfulness, being present in the moment. These are definitely practices that you preach and do with patients. What other stuff do you do? Because I know you do a lot of interesting modalities.
Oh, well, it's kind of built on that platform. I do a lot of somatic practice. I'm a somatic EMDR practitioner as well. And in that, it's really going into our nervous system, right? It's going into a part of us that doesn't necessarily have the cognitive language to be able to say, this is how I'm feeling right now. So we really get creative with that and exploratory of that to see how much of what I've experienced is really lodged in my nervous system and I'm not even consciously aware of. So again, growing that ongoing awareness that we grow within self-exploration and self-understanding. And I'll be honest, some of the work that we utilize too is cognitive behavioral therapy, really recognizing how much our thoughts play a role in what's going on in our body. So CBT is a big framework. And going back into kind of what's our internal narrative, a lot of narrative therapy that we utilize in here, kind of like Ashley, I think, talked about it, just expressing it and verbally saying what it is, that I want sexually or that's coming up for me in regards to sex being so difficult. Sometimes even just to write it, just to express it outside of self. It's finding these different portals, these different modalities to be able to move things, to shake things, to create an opportunity for other things to happen.
When we met the first time and went out to lunch, you're like, "Oh, I gotta go back to work." I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta go back to work." She's like, "No, it's fun. These people haven't had sex in like 6 years and we're just drawing pictures right now."
Oh, yes. And we do. I mean, we just find different creative ways to utilize to open these things up. And it's fun because I do a lot of intensive work too, where I'm able to see a couple or an individual for 3 days in a row or 5 days in a row. And so we get to do that condensed therapy that we do over a course of a year or years within that time frame where you get to utilize all of these different modalities and tools because, okay, there's a block there. It's not effective. It's not working. Let's try this. Like this little apparatus and machine you see behind me, it's EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so again, and the idea of that is really kind of bringing up those stuck points, distress, trauma, to be able to find a way to lean into it in a way where my nervous system needs to process it cognitively, my thinking brain, my feeling brain, all of it, to flush that through in a way that is constructive to where it is that I want to head. In EMDR, that type of therapy is utilized to treat distress and trauma that may block you from being able to have success within kind of your personal goals or your relational goals.
Yeah. What does EMDR look like? You mentioned the apparatus you have. What does it look like?
Yeah, so it's a light bar and it also has vibrating tactiles in your hand. And so some people like to keep their eyes open and they're more comfortable just watching the light move from left to right. And we get a tone and a modality that works best for others are comfortable with. And the idea behind that is it activates your thinking brain and your feeling brain to be able to bridge that gap and come together in a way for you to process that experience differently, to transform it in a more constructive way for your healing.
Fascinating.
And so that bilateral stimulation is what helps you process it differently than you would if you were just talking about it through psychotherapy.
The nervous system and the brain is so fascinating and integral, and it just connects. Like with sex, I always think it's a bottom to the top. So from your vulva to your brain and back down, like, and it's your whole life story. Everything needs to be evaluated. So, and I
And
know you. Oh,
and
go ahead.
everything's so circular, right?
Mhm.
Like it's not like we get to this peak and we plateau and it
Yeah.
comes back around, like you said.
Yeah. Well, shout out to Karen, your somatic healer. I know you utilize some of that. Can you explain that?
Yeah, she's my miracle body worker. She's actually a massage therapist and a somatic healer, so she can integrate touch and expand and explore that while she's touching. Like I've also had couples move into that space where they're touching one another with her presence there to be able to really gain insight and understanding of what's going on with me. Do I like this? Do I want more of this, less of this? How would I describe this? Where again, we're just giving ourselves permission to explore it a little bit more. Another colleague of mine that I'm utilizing too is her practice is Vitality Within, and she actually comes to women's homes, and her overall piece is psychoeducation of different sexual tools to utilize and then to enhance. sexual goals, what it is, like if we want to add more spice into that, and where it's more of a psychoeducation factor than it is for you having to go into a sex shop and be able to ask, okay, which vibrator should I use and why? And so I just think knowing that these resources exist and we're here to support, to be able to enhance your sexual goals, reach your sexual goals, and know that there's help to be able to access that.
Yeah, you can thrive. You really can. There's people like you to help. It's hard to access, I feel, for sex therapy. That is a challenge.
There's not enough of you.
It's a growing community, though. There is such a huge need.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to be a part of something that is so needed and be able to kind of see the transformation that takes place, just really allowing a space to contain this and grow this.
We have people come see us, and you might be listening to this and go, I have low libido, and I'm going to call my gynecologist. What do you, as the sex therapist, what would you like to be evaluated? Like, what should the patient say? What should the practitioner they're seeing? Like, what helps you, would you say? Because I feel like so many women go and it's low libido, and then the practitioner goes, well, you just should go to sex therapy. And the patients were like, what in the world?
So
Like,
discouraged,
yeah.
right?
Because it's a stigma to them. Maybe what are they going to do? What if we go to sex therapy? Like, I mean, I pull up your website and I'm like, look, she's normal. That's what I do. Look how normal she looks. I swear she's very normal, and she has a comfortability with this. She's very professional. Like, and this is X, Y, and Z why I think you would benefit from seeing someone like Trista. Like, what would you say?
I think you're doing it right there in the sense of normalizing it. Like, I think the number one thing is to normalize that we go through ebbs and flows. And it doesn't indicate that there's something wrong if you're seeing a sex therapist. I don't think highlighting the problem is constructive. I think it's recognizing that we all have ways to grow and expand. And here's another option in that. So just giving them space there of knowing that it doesn't indicate that there's a problem. It just gives us another pathway to see if this is effective to achieving what it is that you're here to achieve.
Yeah. I mean, I think like you were saying, Meredith, I think when someone's told, oh, you need a sex therapist, it's like confirmation that they're broken. Well, I go to a therapist because something's totally wrong with me. I would try to normalize it and try to really show like what it will offer and how it can help, and to really not make it so unapproachable or intimidating.
Because I think so many just get this exasperated, like, "Ugh, you just need a sex therapist,"
Yes.
and that's just left at that. I think it's defeating for people to hear that, when really you are needed. It's just they need a little more education, I think, from our end sometimes on that.
And permission, right? It's okay. It's normal. I see a therapist too, and I'm a therapist. Just allowing that to be like, this is self-exploration. This is personal growth. Again, we don't plateau. We're always growing. We're always learning. We're always expanding. And here's another way to do that. I want to help you get there.
Trista, tell us about what are your biggest wins? What are the things that are the things that get you up in the morning, the things that you're like, yes, this is awesome. Tell us like one of those things.
When I see sexual indiscrepancies within relationships and one wants it more, one doesn't want it at all, like seeing those couples navigate to a way of finding a space of compromise where both are fulfilled and satisfied, I would say is one of my biggest wins, because couples can also be a little challenging, right? You gotta work through some stuff to get to that space. And so I would say that's a big win. I just feel so honored and blessed to be able to do what I do. My patients are amazing. I learn just as much from them as I feel they do. I'm not even the expert in the room, they are. And it's just amazing to be a part of that and see them accomplish these goals that when they first come into my office and think it's the impossible, and to just see them conquer it and feel at peace with themselves, accept themselves, love themselves. Honored. Every day's a win. Truly,
Love
every
it.
patient is a win. Honored to do what I do.
I love it. So sex therapists, you guys are licensed by state, right? Just like what physicians are. So
That's correct.
if a patient is not in Texas, what's the best resource to find a good sex therapist? Is that you recommend the ASEC website or?
That's exactly what I was going to recommend. The ASEC website, American Association of Sex Education Counselors and Therapists, they have a whole listserv of therapists that are certified sex therapists, because people can declare themselves as sex therapists without the credentialing. So that's something really important that I always help my patients understand and know that anybody can claim to be whatever kind of therapist. Those credentials are really important. So ASEC is top notch. Find the providers on there.
And then do you guys usually do, it probably differs per therapist, but telehealth and in person, probably some mixture, probably more telehealth these days.
Actually, I like my in-person, and that's where even out of state, I do a lot of out-of-state intensives. So it's not that I don't work, and oftentimes they fly here to see me and spend a weekend or spend a week. That's an option too. But telehealth, it's all mixed in. But even that is state by state licensure.
And then we'll put all this all in the show notes. But how do people find you?
Yeah. So I am on Psychology Today. You can find me, a sex provider, shedfw.com. I'm pretty easy to access. If you just put my name into Google, you'll find me. And doors open. I would love to be able to hear from you and help in any way that I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a great conversation. And thank you for doing what you do. Meredith has raved about you for a long time. So I feel honored to get to talk to you this morning. So thank you.
Awesome, ladies. Thank you so much. What an honor. Yeah. Truly.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Labia Logic.
We get it. Sharing a podcast like this might feel a little taboo, but we're here to break down those barriers. Labia Logic's all about empowerment, not embarrassment.
If you found this episode helpful, we hope you share it with others who could use a little labia logic in their lives. Can't we all? You can find us on all major podcast platforms and connect with us on Instagram at labia_logic.
From our lips to yours,
Viva la vulva!